Hey guys, tonight we slip into the cold, drafty stone halls of medieval England, where whispers are more dangerous than swords, and a single rose can symbolize a dynasty's desperate fight for survival. You're gliding through forgotten tapestries, the scent of damp earth and old incense clinging to the air, as a silken laugh from a distant lord conceals a blood-chilling plot brewing right under your nose. Be careful where you step. You'd last 5 minutes in this den of secrets before tripping over a dagger, or, perhaps worse, an inconvenient truth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And whisper in the comments where you're drifting off from and the hour on your clock. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift into tonight's shadowy tale together. You find yourself standing on the precipice of a dynastic maelstrom, a tumultuous period in English history known, rather poetically, as the Wars of the Roses. Imagine a crown, not simply adorned with jewels, but dripping with the ambition and paranoia of two mighty families, both claiming divine right to wear it. This isn't just a squabble over land or a nightly tournament gone awry. This is a saga of betrayal, madness, and opulent decadence spiraling into utter chaos. The air is thick with anticipation, as if the very stones of the castles around you are holding their breath, waiting for the next shocking twist. You're walking through a land where powerful magnates, often richer than the crown itself, commanded private armies, turning every noble estate into a fortress and every country lane into a potential ambush site. Forget about quaint villages and merry folk dances. The mid-15th century in England was a grand spectacle of lawlessness, heavy taxation, and what historians rather politely call near anarchy. It was a time when the common folk probably just wanted to get on with their lives, tending their sheep or perfecting their ale recipes. But alas, the whims of their highborn rulers kept dragging them into a deadly dance. One might even chuckle at the sheer audacity of these nobles, who, despite holding unimaginable wealth, still managed to run the country into the ground. These folks turned excess into an art form, but sometimes that art involved too much plotting and too little governing. At the heart of this unfolding drama is the Lancastrian king, Henry VI. You observe him from a discreet distance, perhaps through the flickering light of a grand hall. He's a pious man, more suited for quiet contemplation and religious devotion than the cutthroat world of politics. Alas, fate had a cruel trick up its sleeve for Henry, debilitating spells of madness that would periodically plunge him into a state of utter detachment. It's a tragic sight, witnessing a king who, in his lucid moments, genuinely desired peace, yet found his kingdom tearing itself apart. His queen, Margaret of Anjou, a formidable woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper will, became his anchor, his voice, and arguably, his greatest vulnerability. She was the power behind the throne, a regent by necessity, navigating a court rife with backstabbing and ambition, all while trying to secure the future for her fragile husband and their young son. One can't help but admire her fierce determination, even if her methods often leaned towards the ruthless side. She reminds you that in these shadowy courts, a queen's love for her family could be as potent a weapon as any knight's sword. The year is 1453. King Henry VI has just suffered a severe mental collapse, rendering him utterly incapable of ruling. Imagine the panic, the whispers, the frantic scrambling for power among the elite. Into this vacuum steps Richard, Duke of York, a man of immense power, wealth, and crucially, a strong claim to the throne himself, through his descent from Edward III. He is swiftly installed as the protector of the realm, a temporary regent meant to govern until the king's recovery. You watch as he moves through the court, his presence commanding, yet you can sense the underlying tension, the Lancastrian loyalists seething at his newfound authority. It's like watching a chess game where every move is calculated, every smile a potential trap. But Henry's recovery in 1455 shatters the fragile peace. As if on cue, Queen Margaret, who had been sidelined by York's regency, regains her influence, restoring her loyalists to power and effectively pushing York back into the shadows. The stage is set. York, feeling his authority and perhaps his very life threatened, takes the fateful decision to raise arms. The First Battle of St. Albans erupts. You can almost hear the clash of steel, the shouts, the thud of bodies. It's a Yorkist victory, a swift, decisive blow that sees several prominent Lancastrian nobles fall. This isn't just a battle, it's a declaration. The White Rose of York has openly challenged the Red Rose of Lancaster, and the quiet simmer of discontent has boiled over into open warfare. It's truly fascinating how a simple flower could become the emblem of such profound devastation. Imagine explaining that to someone from the future. The years that follow are a blur of shifting loyalties and brutal skirmishes. The conflict escalates, fueled by personal vendettas, greed for land, and the sheer momentum of war. Battles like Northampton, Wakefield, and Towton become chilling names in the annals of history, each one marking a new turning point, a new set of casualties. At Wakefield, a particularly grim event unfolds where Richard of York himself is killed, along with his young son, Edmund, Earl of Rutland. It's a moment of profound tragedy, yet from the ashes of this defeat rises a new, formidable Yorkist figure, Edward IV, Richard's eldest son, who is soon proclaimed king. You watch him ascend, a young, charismatic figure, seemingly destined to bring stability, but as history often shows, power is a fickle mistress. Even within the seemingly united Yorkist ranks, dark currents churn beneath the surface. The man who was arguably the architect of Yorkist success, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, known to history as the Kingmaker, begins to chafe under Edward IV's rule. Warwick, once Edward's staunchest ally, grows increasingly resentful of the king's independent decisions and his choice of alliances. This internal fracture within the victorious faction is a classic tale of power corrupting absolutely. It's like watching a meticulously built sandcastle crumble from within, not by the waves, but by a crack in its own foundation. The Kingmaker, in a shocking betrayal that leaves the court reeling, turns against Edward IV and, in an almost unbelievable twist, briefly restores the ailing Henry VI to the throne in 1470. This bizarre reversal makes you wonder, was Henry VI simply a pawn, or did some lingering, uncanny royal aura pull him back from the brink of oblivion, if only for a moment? Historians still ponder the true motivations behind Warwick's dramatic flip-flop. Was it pure ambition, a genuine ideological shift, or perhaps a secret pact whispered in moonlit chambers? This intricate dance of power and betrayal extends even to the most mundane aspects of noble life. You might observe a court feast where nobles, in a display of their immense wealth, are served elaborate dishes garnished with real gold leaf. Yes, these elite truly ate gold. It wasn't just for show, they believed it had medicinal properties, or perhaps they simply enjoyed the ultimate flex of their extravagance. Imagine chewing on something that costs more than a village's annual harvest. It's a quirky oddity that highlights their detachment from the common reality, a symptom of the same excess that fueled their endless conflicts. Their lives were a paradox, immense luxury coexisting with brutal political instability. The constant shifting of allegiances, the brutal battles, the seemingly endless cycle of retribution. It's enough to make you wonder if there was some deeper, historical enigma at play. Was this truly just a struggle for power, or was there an underlying force, a curse of the crown perhaps, driving these noble families to self-destruction? Scholarly riddles persist, with some historians questioning whether certain untimely deaths were indeed battlefield casualties or carefully orchestrated murders disguised by the fog of war. The fate of young princes in the Tower, for instance, remains one of history's most enduring unsolved puzzles. Was it murder or fate that truly sealed their tragic destinies? These are the secrets that still echo through the silent stones of England's ancient castles. You find yourself immersed deeper in the intricate dance of alliances and betrayals, a grim ballet where the delicate petals of a rose belie the brutal thorns beneath. The White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster, seemingly innocuous symbols, have become banners under which brothers fought brothers, and families were torn asunder. You can almost feel the weight of these emblems, each petal steeped in the blood and ambition of the nobles who bore them. It's truly astonishing how such beauty could be twisted into a motif for such devastation. Imagine someone today wearing a team jersey that signaled a deadly feud. After the initial skirmishes and the surprising ascent of Edward IV, you might have thought a new era of stability had dawned. Edward, with his dashing looks and military prowess, seemed the very embodiment of a strong monarch, a stark contrast to the pious and often incapacitated Henry VI. You observe him at court, a figure of vitality and charm, yet beneath the surface, the seeds of discontent were already being sown, even within his own triumphant house. Power, it seems, is a particularly tempting siren, and once tasted, it rarely allows for peaceful coexistence. Consider the Earl of Warwick, Richard Neville, the Kingmaker. He was, for a time, Edward IV's staunchest ally, the strategic genius who orchestrated much of the Yorkist success. You might see him moving through the crowded court, his influence palpable, his words carrying immense weight. He was the kind of man who could make or break a king, and for a while, he made Edward. But a curious tension began to brew. Edward, perhaps weary of being Warwick's puppet, started making his own decisions, notably his marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, a commoner with a large, ambitious family. This was a direct snub to Warwick, who had been negotiating a more politically advantageous French match for the king. It's almost comical, if it weren't so tragic, how a king's choice of spouse could ignite such a monumental feud. One can almost picture Warwick muttering, "After all I've done for him, he marries her?" The Woodville family, suddenly elevated from relative obscurity to positions of power and influence, became a source of immense irritation for the established nobility, particularly Warwick. You sensed the resentment, the whispered slights in the antechambers, the polite smiles concealing seething jealousy. It's a timeless tale of new money clashing with old aristocracy. Except in this version, the clashes involved armies and executions rather than just snobbish remarks at dinner parties. These newly empowered Woodvilles, much like a sudden infestation of very well-dressed, ambitious ants, seemed to be everywhere, snapping up lucrative marriages and powerful positions. The fracture between Edward IV and Warwick deepened into an irreparable chasm. You witnessed the Kingmaker's shocking betrayal. Warwick, using his vast network of alliances and his immense wealth, openly rebelled against Edward. It's a moment that would have sent ripples of disbelief across Europe. The very man who had placed Edward on the throne now sought to tear him down. And in a bewildering twist, Warwick actually managed to briefly restore Henry VI to the throne in 1470. Imagine the confusion, the sheer bewilderment of the populace. Wait, so Henry's back? Didn't we just fight a war to get rid of him? This is getting ridiculous. It certainly makes you wonder about the logistics of moving kings on and off thrones like chess pieces. During these tumultuous times, noble families had some truly eccentric customs to demonstrate their status and loyalty. For instance, the practice of heraldry became incredibly elaborate. Not only did they have their family crests, but they'd wear badges of their chosen rose, sometimes interwoven with other symbols to show allegiance to specific factions within a house. You might see nobles commissioning magnificent, custom-made tapestries or stained glass windows depicting their intricate lineage and their chosen rose, often at immense cost. It was like a medieval version of competitive branding, except your brand's failure could literally cost you your head. One historical nugget often overlooked is the sheer amount of money nobles spent on elaborate liveries for their retainers, fancy uniforms with their specific colors and badges. It was a walking advertisement of their power, but also a massive drain on their coffers, sometimes even contributing to their downfall. The political machinations were so convoluted that even seasoned observers would struggle to keep up. Consider the scholarly riddle surrounding the true fate of Edward IV's younger brother, George, Duke of Clarence. George, a notoriously fickle and ambitious figure, oscillated between loyalty to Edward and plots against him. Ultimately, he was attainted for treason and executed. The intriguing riddle? He was supposedly drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine in the Tower of London. Historians still debate whether this was a literal execution method or a euphemism for a more conventional, albeit secretive, killing. Was it a grotesque joke by Edward, a macabre act of poetic justice, or simply a convenient story to mask a more brutal reality? You can almost hear the hushed whispers in the taverns, speculating on the details of such an unusual demise. It perfectly illustrates how easily facts could be distorted or obscured in an age dominated by power and intrigue. The Wars of the Roses also saw a curious phenomenon where noble women often played a pivotal, albeit often overlooked, role. Queens like Margaret of Anjou were obvious political figures, but even lesser-known duchesses and countesses engaged in intense letter-writing campaigns, managed estates during their husbands' absences or deaths, and arranged strategic marriages for their children. You might observe them, seemingly demure in their lavish gowns, yet pulling strings behind the scenes with a quiet strength that belied their outward appearance. They were like the invisible gears in the grand clockwork of power, essential for its operation, yet rarely credited. The sheer unpredictability of allegiance during this period is a testament to the fractured loyalty of the time. One moment, a lord might be fighting for Lancaster, only to switch sides if it seemed advantageous, or if his previous patron fell. It was less about ideological conviction and more about pragmatic survival and opportunistic advancement. You can almost hear a modern quip about them. These guys change sides more often than they change their tunics. It was a brutal game of musical chairs, where the music could stop and you'd find yourself without a seat, or worse, without your head. The constant threat of attainder, where a noble could lose all their lands and titles for treason, kept everyone on edge, making loyalty a fleeting commodity. The tension in the air is almost palpable. You witness the constant fear, the quiet paranoia that permeated the lives of these powerful figures. Every alliance was temporary, every feast potentially poisoned, every smile a possible prelude to betrayal. The shadow of the two roses loomed large over every decision, every marriage, every birth, and every death. It was an era where the concept of noble honor was often secondary to the cold, hard calculus of survival and ambition. The grand castles, built to withstand sieges from without, often crumbled from the intrigues within. The beautiful flowers, the white and the red, became a macabre garland for a kingdom teetering on the brink. You continue your shadowy journey through these troubled times, and what becomes strikingly clear is the profound moral decay that gnawed at the heart of the English aristocracy. It wasn't just about who sat on the throne. It was about the utter unraveling of societal norms, the casual cruelty, and the tragic, often mysterious, fates that befell even the most powerful figures. You witness a landscape where ambition had become a consuming fire, burning away loyalty, kinship, and even basic humanity. It's a sobering thought. Even with all their opulent wealth and grand titles, these nobles often lived lives far more precarious than the common farmer, constantly teetering on the edge of ruin. The constant bloodshed and shifting allegiances had a deeply corrosive effect. Imagine living in a world where your neighbor, your cousin, or even your own sibling could suddenly become your deadliest enemy, simply because of a change in the political winds. Property was seized, lands were forfeited, and families who had held power for generations found themselves utterly dispossessed, cast into poverty or exile. The once grand estates, symbols of enduring power, became places of fleeting occupation, changing hands with every new victory. It almost makes you want to suggest they invest in a good home insurance policy, if such a thing existed then. The concept of a stable succession, once the bedrock of royal power, completely disintegrated. King Henry VI, the Lancastrian figurehead, found himself a mere pawn in this deadly game. After Warwick's audacious move to restore him, Henry was effectively a king in name only, a frail ghost presiding over a court that hummed with plots to remove him once more. You might see him, a gaunt, distant figure, wandering the castle gardens, perhaps whispering prayers while the kingdom outside his walls tore itself apart. His fate evokes a profound sense of pity, a man utterly unsuited for the brutal world he was forced to inhabit. His periodic lapses into catatonia were perhaps a mercy, allowing him to escape the grim reality of his reign. The Yorkist Edward IV, despite regaining his throne after a brief exile, faced constant challenges. He was a survivor, a formidable warrior, but even his charisma and military genius couldn't erase the deep-seated divisions. His reliance on the Woodville family, as recalled from our last whisper, only exacerbated the tensions among the older nobility. You might observe a grand court function, gleaming chandeliers casting a warm glow, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and fine wine. Yet beneath the surface, every noble eye is calculating, every conversation a veiled probe for weaknesses. The laughter is a little too loud, the smiles a little too wide, betraying the ever-present anxiety of who might be next to fall. The Wars of the Roses were not just about battles on open fields. They were fought in the shadows of the royal court, within the very bedchambers of the nobility. Poison, betrayal by trusted confidants, and accidental deaths were as much a part of the conflict as swords and arrows. The intriguing scholarly riddle of the princes in the tower, mentioned earlier, perfectly encapsulates this dark facet. After Edward IV's sudden death, his young sons, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, were placed in the Tower of London, ostensibly for their protection by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, later Richard III. They were never seen again. Historians endlessly debate their fate. Were they murdered on Richard III's orders to clear his path to the throne, or did they meet some other tragic end? The fact that their disappearance remains unsolved to this day speaks volumes about the capacity for dark deeds and hidden truths within these noble circles. It's the kind of mystery that keeps you awake long after the candles have burned down. Amidst this darkness, there were some truly quirky oddities that shed light on the peculiar mindset of the nobility. For instance, many nobles during this period were obsessed with acquiring exotic animals for their private menageries, not just for display, but as symbols of their power and wealth. You might hear tales of a duke who owned a lion, or a countess who had a pet monkey, imported at immense cost. Imagine the logistical nightmare of transporting a giraffe across medieval Europe. It's a whimsical, yet telling, detail that contrasts sharply with the brutal realities of their lives, highlighting their often fragile grasp on practicalities. These were people who could afford to literally import a zoo, but couldn't manage to keep their kingdom from tearing itself apart. The human cost of this prolonged conflict was immense, extending far beyond the battlefield. Entire noble lines were extinguished, their male heirs systematically hunted down and executed to prevent any future claims to the throne. This policy of extirpation was brutal, a chillingly effective way to consolidate power. You might hear hushed stories of ancient families, once proud and numerous, reduced to a single surviving child hidden away in a convent, or a distant cousin living in obscurity abroad. The emotional toll on the survivors, those who had witnessed their loved ones fall and their fortunes vanish, must have been devastating. It was a time when the weight of inheritance could be a death sentence. A key historical nugget from this period is the increasing use of attainder by Parliament as a political weapon. An attainder was a legal act that declared a person guilty of treason without a trial, confiscating their lands and titles, and disinheriting their heirs. It was a terrifyingly efficient way for a victorious faction to eliminate its rivals and enrich itself. You could be a powerful lord one day and an outlaw the next, simply by a parliamentary decree issued by your enemies. It was a legal loophole, or perhaps a legal sledgehammer, that allowed for the systematic dismantling of opposing noble families. This practice shows how the law itself was twisted to serve political ambition, a truly dark aspect of governance. The constant paranoia led to elaborate security measures within noble households. You might observe guards posted at every turn, secret passages, and even food tasters employed to prevent poisoning. Even then, no one was truly safe. A servant's loyalty could be bought, a trusted advisor could be a spy, and a quiet cough could be a sign of a deadly affliction. The air was thick with suspicion, and every interaction felt like a delicate negotiation. It's a wonder any noble managed to get a good night's sleep. The sheer theatricality of the noble world, with its elaborate ceremonies and strict etiquette, served as a thin veneer over a core of ruthless self-preservation. These were people who understood that appearances mattered, even as they plotted each other's demise. The tragic twists of fate were endless. The young heir, barely out of childhood, sent to battle and never returning. The once powerful duchess, stripped of her jewels and left to die in poverty. The cunning lord, finally outmaneuvered and meeting a grisly end. Each story, a whisper in the annals of time, adds to the hypnotic tapestry of the Wars of the Roses, revealing the profound human cost of unbridled ambition and a kingdom tearing itself apart from within. As you drift deeper into the annals of this warring kingdom, a chilling thought begins to take root. Was this endless cycle of bloodshed and betrayal merely the consequence of human ambition, or was there an ancient curse, a malevolent shadow, clinging to the English throne? You can almost hear the faint echoes of an old prophecy, whispered by forgotten seers, hinting at a destiny of sorrow for any who dared to wear the crown. It's a pervasive sense, a feeling that no matter how cunning the plot or how fierce the battle, tragedy was always the ultimate victor. The death of Edward IV in 1483, sudden and unexpected for a man in his prime, certainly lends credence to the idea of a lingering doom. You might observe the somber procession, the heavy silence that falls over London as the news spreads. Edward had brought a semblance of order back to England, albeit through his formidable will and military might. His reign, though punctuated by fierce challenges, had seemed to offer a pathway to stability. Yet, with his passing, the fragile peace shattered once more, opening the door for the most notorious figure of the Wars of the Roses to step into the spotlight: Richard, Duke of Gloucester, Edward's youngest brother. You watch as Richard, initially named protector of his young nephew, Edward V, begins his calculated ascent. Every move is precise, every gesture seemingly designed to reassure, yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. The rapid dismissal and imprisonment of the Woodville faction, seen by many as a necessary clearing of the corrupt court, quickly turned into something far more sinister. The young King Edward V and his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, were soon lodged in the Tower of London. Recall our earlier riddle about the princes in the Tower? This is the very nexus of that enduring mystery. Their disappearance cemented Richard III's controversial legacy, casting a long, dark shadow over his brief reign. It's truly a masterclass in swift, ruthless political maneuvering, leaving one to wonder if he secretly took a course in advanced Machiavellian tactics. Richard III was crowned king, ushering in a reign that was intensely controversial even in his own time. You might observe his coronation, a grand spectacle designed to project authority and legitimacy, yet overshadowed by the chilling whispers about the fate of his nephews. He was a capable administrator and a brave warrior, often portrayed as a villain of the highest order by later Tudor historians. But even his supporters couldn't entirely dispel the clouds of suspicion. The notion of a curse on the usurper's throne certainly gained traction as unrest continued to simmer. The end of the Wars of the Roses, however, was not brought about by an internal shift of power within the Yorkist or Lancastrian lines, but by an outsider, a man who, by all accounts, had a rather tenuous claim to the throne, yet became the unlikely harbinger of a new era. This was Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian descendant who had spent most of his life in exile in Brittany and France. You might imagine him, far from the opulence of the English court, honing his patience, observing the chaos from afar, waiting for his moment. He was certainly not the flashy, charismatic type, more of a quiet, calculating sort, much like a meticulous accountant planning a hostile takeover. The historical nugget here is the unique nature of Henry Tudor's claim. He was not a direct male-line descendant of the Lancastrian kings. His claim came through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, a great-granddaughter of John of Gaunt, Edward III's son. This indirect lineage meant his claim was weak compared to many others. Yet, it was precisely his outsider status, combined with the general exhaustion of England from decades of war, that made him a viable alternative. He offered a chance for peace, a cessation to the bleeding. It's an intriguing thought that the man who finally ended the war had one of the flimsiest claims. Sometimes, being less entangled in the existing web of hatred is a powerful advantage. Amidst this desperate struggle for the throne, the nobility displayed some truly bizarre social customs. One quirky elite oddity was the burgeoning trend of elaborate jousting tournaments that became incredibly complex affairs, far removed from simple martial training. Nobles would spend fortunes on ornate armor, caparisoned horses, and theatrical entrances, often based on fantastical themes. You might see a lord dressed as a mythical beast, or a knight entering atop a miniature castle on wheels, all to impress onlookers and showcase their wealth. These extravagant displays continued even as the country was tearing itself apart. almost as if they believed a bit of pageantry could distract from the grim reality. It was a fascinating, if somewhat tone-deaf, way to spend vast sums of money. The final act of this tragic drama culminates at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. You are not there to witness the graphic details, but you can feel the momentousness of the event. Here, Richard III, the last Plantagenet king, faced Henry Tudor's invading force. Despite being outnumbered, Richard fought bravely, reportedly seeking out Henry Tudor personally on the battlefield. His defeat and death marked the end of an era, a final, bloody punctuation mark on decades of civil strife. The crown, famously found in a hawthorn bush and placed on Henry Tudor's head, symbolically transferred the destiny of England. This final confrontation raises an intriguing scholarly riddle. Was Richard III truly the deformed, villainous tyrant portrayed by Tudor propaganda, or was he a competent ruler, merely caught in the crosshairs of history, his reputation slandered to legitimize the new dynasty? The discovery of his remains under a Leicester car park in 2012 only fueled this debate, allowing for a more nuanced understanding of his physical characteristics and, by extension, his personality. Was his demise at Bosworth merely a military defeat, or was it the ultimate karmic retribution for the alleged murder of his nephews? The answers remain elusive, lost in the mists of time and the biases of the victors. The perceived curse of the Plantagenets, if it existed, seemed to be broken by the union of the two warring houses. Henry Tudor, now Henry VII, married Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's daughter, in 1486. This strategic marriage symbolically merged the red and white roses, creating the Tudor rose, a new emblem, signifying peace and unity after so much bloodshed. You might observe their wedding, a less ostentatious affair than some, but laden with immense historical significance. It was a conscious effort to heal old wounds and present a united front, but the shadows of the past and the fates of those who fell would forever linger, a quiet warning woven into the very fabric of the new dynasty. The whispers of the past, the tragic twists, and the secret ambitions all contributed to this long, winding path to what would become a new chapter for England, but one built on a foundation stained with a generation of noble blood. You now stand at the precipice of a new era, as the turbulent waters of the Wars of the Roses finally begin to recede, leaving behind a reshaped landscape and a new dynasty. The absolute power that so many nobles craved had, ironically, turned their closest confidants into their deadliest enemies, leading to unexpected and often brutal conclusions. The final acts of this long-running drama saw the rise of the Tudors, a family that, by sheer will and strategic acumen, managed to unite the fractured kingdom. Henry Tudor, now King Henry VII, found himself at the helm of a nation utterly exhausted by decades of civil war. You might observe his early days on the throne, not a flamboyant display of royal might, but a cautious, methodical consolidation of power. His victory at Bosworth Field in 1485 was decisive, but it was just the beginning of his true challenge, securing a lasting peace and legitimizing his somewhat tenuous claim to the crown. He knew that the embers of Yorkist defiance still glowed, ready to be fanned into flame by any discontent. His most brilliant stroke, as we briefly touched upon, was his marriage to Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's daughter. You imagine their union, not a grand love match, but a political masterpiece, symbolically weaving the red rose of Lancaster with the white rose of York into the new Tudor rose. It was a conscious effort to heal the generational wounds, a visual promise of unity. Yet, you can almost sense the underlying tension in the early years of their marriage, the quiet apprehension of two individuals from opposing factions suddenly bound by matrimony. Did Elizabeth secretly harbor resentment for the man who had defeated her uncle and indirectly benefited from the disappearance of her brothers? This intriguing scholarly riddle of their true personal dynamic, beyond the political facade, remains a captivating mystery for historians. Was it a marriage of duty that blossomed into affection, or one of quiet, enduring distrust? Henry VII faced immediate challenges from remaining Yorkist loyalists, who continued to produce pretenders to the throne, aiming to destabilize his reign. One such notable example, a key historical nugget, was the Lambert Simnel Rebellion. Simnel was a young boy who was tutored to impersonate Edward, Earl of Warwick, the nephew of Edward IV and Richard III, who was actually imprisoned in the Tower of London by Henry VII. Imagine the sheer audacity of this plot. Simnel was even crowned King Edward VI in Ireland. Henry VII, with his characteristic pragmatism, paraded the real Earl of Warwick publicly to expose the fraud. The rebellion culminated in the Battle of Stoke Field in 1487, a fierce engagement that many historians consider the true final battle of the Wars of the Roses. Henry VII crushed the rebellion decisively, solidifying his grip on the throne. The way Henry VII dealt with Lambert Simnel reveals a quirky, elite oddity of his reign. Instead of executing the boy, Henry gave him a job in the royal kitchens as a turnspit, someone who turned meat on a spit, and later promoted him to falconer. Imagine being a pretender to the throne one day and cooking dinner for the real king the next. It's a testament to Henry's shrewdness, showcasing both his mercy, or perhaps his confidence, and his subtle humor. He wasn't about bloody revenge, but about disarming his enemies by making them ridiculously ordinary. It must have been a rather humbling career change for Simnel, from king to kitchen help. The long shadow of the Wars of the Roses, however, was not entirely dispelled by the Tudor ascendancy. The memory of attainders, of families ruined and lives lost, instilled a deep-seated caution in the new dynasty. Henry VII, and later his son Henry VIII, ruled with a firm hand, often using the ghost of past civil strife as a justification for their absolute authority. The nobility, having seen countless of their peers fall from grace, became far more subservient to the crown. The balance of power shifted decisively from the great magnates to the monarch. It was a brutal lesson learned through a generation of conflict. You observe the meticulous record-keeping, the careful management of royal finances that became Henry VI's hallmark. He understood that wealth was power, and he rebuilt the royal treasury, which had been depleted by decades of war. He was less a dashing knight and more a shrewd businessman, a king who counted every penny. His court might have lacked the flamboyant excess of some of his predecessors, but it exuded a quiet, almost cold, efficiency. This pragmatic approach, though perhaps not as exciting for a storyteller, was precisely what England needed to recover. The final, unexpected twists were often subtle. Figures who had barely survived the Plantagenet turmoil found quiet lives under the Tudors, while others, once obscure, rose to prominence in the new court. The old alliances and enmities, though officially buried, sometimes simmered just beneath the surface, passed down through generations. You might catch a glimpse of an old noble, his eyes carrying the weight of lost friends and bitter memories, as he bows deferentially to the new Tudor king. The scars of the Roses ran deep, even if they were no longer bleeding. The legacy of the Wars of the Roses was not just about who won or lost, but about the profound societal transformation it wrought. It marked a brutal end to an era of unchecked feudal power and paved the way for a more centralized monarchy. The very structure of English society was irrevocably altered, forged in the crucible of conflict. The story of the Two Roses, therefore, isn't just a tale of noble intrigue and royal scandal. It's a profound narrative about the cost of power, the fragility of peace, and the surprising resilience of a nation rebuilding itself from the ashes of its own darkest chapter. The whispers of those noble shadows still echo, reminding us that even the most beautiful symbols can conceal the most brutal truths. And now, as our journey through the shadowed courts of the Wars of the Roses draws to a close, you can almost feel the gentle breeze of the English countryside replacing the heavy air of ancient castles. Let the echoes of distant battles and whispered secrets soften into a peaceful hum. The clash of steel fades, the glint of ambition dims, and the ghosts of kings and queens, once so fiercely alive in our tale, now drift gently into the long sleep of history. Allow the intricate tapestry of betrayals and triumphs to unravel into pure comfort, a soothing backdrop for your own quiet repose. You've navigated the treacherous currents of power and witnessed the poignant beauty of a nation's rebirth. May your mind be clear, your spirit at ease, and your dreams filled with tranquility, far from the whispers of noble shadows.